The American left routinely tells everyone, including to the Europeans, that all they want is to make America more like Europe. And it's basically reactionary Republicans and bitter European rightists like me who mischaracterize them as communists and degenerates, when all they really want is for Americans to enjoy the privileges and the framework existent in Europe. The only problem is that when push comes to shove, the American left opposes making America more like Europe. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so whether you believe the United States should be more like Europe or not, I certainly do not believe that, there must come a point when one should start asking whether the American left actually wants that or not. My contention is that they're not even remotely on that page. The American left exists solely for the purpose of hating white people, white men in particular, advancing totalitarian interests, particularly of the Islamic flavor, and undermining the United States as a whole and the free world by extension. The carrot of trying to push for more European style of politics is at best a rotten carrot, and more often than not, an imaginary carrot. To emphasize this point, I'll present 6 examples of European policy that is vigorously opposed by the American left. So, without further ado, number 1, the 20-week abortion ban. At the end of January 2018, by a vote of 51 to 46 in the American Senate, the measure that would have banned abortions federally after the 20th week into the pregnancy failed. Only 2 Democrats voted for the bill and 2 Republicans, to their eternal shame, voted against the bill. By the way, anyone voting for Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska needs to have their heads checked. The de facto Democrat leader, Elizabeth Warren, otherwise known for her advocacy of more European style of policies, said on the floor of the Senate the following quote, "A lot of women are alive today because of Roe," and she also called the ban part of a broad and sustained assault by Republican politicians on women's rights to make decisions about their bodies, close quote. Of course, no words about how many children, boys and girls, are not alive today because of Roe. But that's standard on the left. What is not standard, though, is calling a 20 weeks ban a right-wing conspiracy. Because with the exception of the United Kingdom, where the issue is a bit murky, and the Netherlands, where even the life of adults is not an issue of concern, nowhere in Europe is abortion legal at 20 weeks. In fact, with the exception of the UK, the Netherlands and Sweden, which has its limits at 16 weeks, all of Europe bans abortion at the 14th week at the latest, and many countries of Europe have even lower limits than that, such as Ireland, Malta and Poland, which have the limit more appropriately set at 0 weeks. Now, one can say that 0 is an extremist position, but the position of the American left that a ban after 20 weeks is an expression of hate is also a highly extremist position. How extremist? So extremist that the only people agreeing with them are the despotic regimes of China, North Korea, Vietnam and Singapore, as well as highly anti-life regimes like the Netherlands, which also allows the legal killing of young children under the guise of euthanasia, and Canada. So what's it gonna be, leftists? For now, the American left would rather be on the same page with socialist dictatorships, which occasionally also engaged in forced abortions, that would be China, I'm looking at you, than be on the same page with perfectly liberal, very kosher, otherwise lefty-approved civilized places like Sweden, Norway, Germany or France. The Republican-initiated Senate bill is not extremist by any means. In fact, it is remarkably moderate, and way too liberal for my taste, by the way. It is the Democrats and the wider American left who are indeed the extremists on this issue. They should at least be open about this instead of trying to fool people into thinking that the Democrat Party is similar to a Social Democrat Party in Europe. It is not. It is far, far worse. Number 2. Corporate taxes. Bernie Sanders, the most dangerous Bolshevik in that criminal organization called the Democrat Party, has gathered hundreds of thousands of poor souls as followers, claiming that all he wants is to make the United States more like Denmark or other social democratic country of Europe. Yet when President Donald J. Trump signed a tax bill that actually does this, namely make the US corporate tax resemble the one in Denmark and most of Europe, Bolshevik Sanders and the vast majority of the American left opposed it. In fact, no Democrat voted for the tax bill and accused the president and the Republican majority of wanting to kill everyone with the tax bill. Because apparently, leaving more money into the pockets of those who actually earn them is murder or something. Meanwhile, the average corporate tax rate in Europe is 22%. Denmark is exactly in the middle with a rate of 22%. The highest is France with a corporate tax of 33.3%, though even France has a reduced rate for small businesses, followed by Greece and Belgium with 29%. Belgium, by the way, is also under a tax reform program. In 2017, the corporate tax rate was 34%. Even the left in Belgium agreed with the plan that sees the reduction of that rate. The first reduction kicked in this year, making the effective corporate tax rate in Belgium 29%, and the further reduction will occur in 2020, when the corporate tax rate will go down to 25%. By contrast, before President Trump signed the tax bill, the United States was in highly extremist territory with the corporate tax rate at 39%. No wonder investments were going out of the country. When it's easier to do business in highly over-regulated leftist environments like Belgium, Sweden, or even France, that's when you know you are in extremist territory. President Trump, of course, knew this already, which is why he insisted more on the corporate tax than on the individual tax. But instead of agreement from the left that finally someone was doing something to make the United States more like Europe, what did the left do? Well, they did what the left always does.
What a great honor to be able to introduce for the first time ever anywhere the 45th President of the United States of America, Donald.
On the shoulder. You adjust the microphone as you talk, man.
Number 3. Infrastructure. President Trump campaigned on many things. One of those things was a pledge to boost domestic spending on infrastructure. Now, I happen to disagree with President Trump on that particular issue, but a lot more baffling is the left's disagreement with the president. Whenever asked to detail his view on the issue, President Trump spoke like the classical social democratic politicians of Germany or Italy. President Trump believes the state has a big role in infrastructure, but he also believes infrastructure is also a job scheme to help the underprivileged, and thus believes local companies should be used. President Trump also said he is open to public-private partnerships in rehabilitating and/or expanding American infrastructure. This, for all intents and purposes, is the mainstream position of any social democratic political party anywhere in Europe, from Ukraine to Portugal, from Turkey to Finland, and from Bulgaria to Norway. There's nothing radical in this belief or policy. Heck, there's nothing even right-wing in this policy either. Yet the American left utterly disagrees. All the Democrats voted against the president's budget and against any proposal that would have indeed increased the spending on infrastructure. If the American left had been serious about its commitment to push more European style of policies in the United States, they would have been thrilled about this plan and indeed rushed to take pictures with President Trump signing the bill and then rushed to tell their base and the grassroots voters and communities how they are the moderates who work within the system for the betterment of the communities that tasked them to represent them. But that would have meant Democrats know how to practical politics, an art that they seem to have forgotten since the days of Bill Clinton. Number 4. Official language and language requirements. The American left, including and especially the Democrat media complex, routinely called President Trump a racist for saying that new immigrants would have to be able to speak English. Notorious to this point is the long and embarrassing argument between one of the most mean-spirited fools of the cathedral media, Jim Acosta of the CNN, and Stephen Miller, at the time policy advisor for the White House. The American left seems to genuinely believe that a requirement for immigrants to speak English would mean the USA would restrict immigration to just Australia, the United Kingdom, and a few other places, a move which the American left contends amounts to racism because those places are predominantly white. Needless to say, such contention is retarded in and of itself, since there are more English speakers in India and China than there are white people in total. But what's even more relevant for this talk is just how un-European the American left is. Every single country in Europe requires immigrants to learn the language of the land, or one of the official languages. Canada requires new immigrants to be proficient in either English or French. Finland requires new immigrants to be proficient in either Finnish or Swedish or Finnish Sign Language. Basically, the concept of having to learn the language of the land if you are to be given citizenship in that land is not in the least bit extremist, and it is in fact quite normal and indeed normative. Heck, even in ultra-leftist Sweden, the left still agrees that there should be language requirements for immigrants and that the immigrants do indeed have to speak Swedish while they are in Sweden. Ultimately, there is one group and one group only in the entire world that does not believe that immigrants need to learn the local language, and that group is the American left. And they only believe that for the United States. You don't hear the American left arguing how Mexico should no longer require immigrants to speak Spanish. In fact, Mexico goes to great lengths to distinguish between a Mexican national and a Mexican citizen. Finland does that too. Basically, being born in Finland or Mexico does not automatically make you a Mexican national or a Mexican or Finnish citizen. You never hear the American left arguing against these things. So not only they are continuously lying to their supporters and to the wider public about their intentions and positions, but the American left is not even consistent with its own positions. Nor does it make any effort to at least explain the inconsistency, which should lead any honest observer to conclude that the purported goal of pushing more European style of policies by the American left is essentially a lie. Number 5. Voter ID. Now, I've made a video in the past about this, so I won't get into it too much, but the short version is this. Everywhere in Europe, everyone from the furthest fringes of the far left to the furthest fringes of the far right agrees that one should produce a form of ID before being allowed to cast a ballot in any election. This, mind you, is a requirement everywhere in the world, as a matter of fact, except the portions of the United States where the American left holds the power. Again, if pushing for more European style of policies would have been the objective of the American left, then voter ID should have been a no-brainer, and immediate and definitive agreement with the Republican position should have happened decades ago. Number 6. Getting one's documents in order and being identifiable. Nowhere in Europe can you throw a fist fight when the police asks you for some ID and expect not to be arrested or at least detained until your identity is established. Now, while I agree that some countries in Europe are indeed extremist on this topic, such as the United Kingdom where the police carry fingerprint scanners on the streets, it is fundamentally wrong for the American left to claim that being expected to carry some form of ID with you is fascism. The American left, especially the grassroots, although increasingly the leadership as well, genuinely believes that an agency such as ICE doing raids and lawfully asking people for an ID constitutes fascism or institutionalized racism because, the left argues, those raids would target predominantly non-white people. Yet this happens in Europe all the time, including in the country that the American left likes to love so much, namely Germany. The American left proclaimed that since the election of President Trump, the leader of the free world is now Angela Merkel. Well, in Merkel's Germany, it is indeed a matter of routine for the Bundespolizei to conduct raids, and if any illegal aliens are found, their cases are then referred to the local competent authorities and also to the Federal Ministry of Migration and Refugees. Nobody seriously argues that that is a form of fascism. In Norway, such raids in areas where there are reasonable suspicions that illegal immigrants congregate are also quite frequent, though not a matter of routine. A good friend of mine was stopped in such a raid on the outskirts of Oslo. He just showed his valid ID, thus proving he was there perfectly legally. The officer thanked him for cooperation, and off he went. Well, not before asking him for a lighter. But that's a story for another day. Ultimately, there is no group in the world, other than the American left, that thinks it should be totally okay to attend taxpayer-funded universities, drive cars on the public roads, reside and even sometimes collect welfare, all while being a so-called undocumented migrant, or in plain English, an illegal alien. Only the American left seriously expects everyone else to believe that requiring people, especially immigrants, to hold proper documentation is somehow fascism. It isn't. No, seriously, it really isn't. So yeah, these are the 6 reasons for which I believe it is safe to say that the American left is further to the left than even the European left. And the contention that the American left is just a party that wants a more European style of policies is a contention that, in light of the evidence presented, can safely be dismissed as either a deceitful exaggeration or an outright lie. So what do you all think? Do you have any other examples in mind where the American left not only disagrees in principle with the European model, but also in practice has shown consistent rejection of it? Please do tell me in the comment section, because we really need to nail this down and then use it relentlessly in future arguments. I found these comparisons to be very efficient, especially with millennial leftists who, once they learn about the facts from Europe, suddenly start asking some of the right questions. And that needs to happen a lot more often. And with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please do consider throwing a shekel if you derive any value from the work being done here. And I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.